Doctor stepped off the transport shuttle and took her first breath of recycled human air. It smelled strange, like metal and something faintly organic that she couldn't identify. Her 4 eyes blinked in sequence as she adjusted to the artificial lighting of Earth Station Gamma. Everything here felt different from the sterile environments she was used to on the Collective. She was one of the best in her field. For 30 cycles, she had studied the minds of sentient species across 17 different worlds. She had mapped the fear responses of the who feared only the deep cold of their planet's winters. She had documented the anxiety patterns of the whose entire psychology revolved around avoiding the massive predators that hunted them. Every species she had ever studied feared things that could kill them. This made perfect sense to her. Fear was a survival tool, nothing more and nothing less. Evolution created fear to keep creatures alive. The Collective Institute of Sentient Cognition had sent her here to study humans as part of a new research initiative. Humans had only recently joined the galactic community, and their psychology remained poorly understood. Had been excited about the assignment. A new species to study meant new data to collect and new patterns to identify. She expected the work to be straightforward. A human man was waiting for her at the end of the docking corridor. He was shorter than she had expected, with dark hair and a warm smile that showed his teeth. Reminded herself that tooth baring was a greeting gesture for humans, not a threat display. "Doctor," he asked, extending his hand in the human greeting ritual. She touched her primary manipulator to his palm briefly. "Yes, you must be Doctor." "That's me. Welcome to Earth Station Gamma. I'll be your liaison during your fellowship. Let me show you to your quarters and then we can discuss your research plans." Followed him through the winding corridors of the station. Humans moved around them in both directions, talking and laughing and going about their daily routines. She observed them carefully, already making mental notes. They seemed remarkably similar to each other in terms of physical structure, yet their clothing and decorations varied wildly. Some wore bright colors while others wore muted tones. Some had decorated their skin with permanent markings. The diversity within uniformity was interesting. Her quarters were comfortable enough, designed to accommodate non-human visitors. Left her to settle in and promised to return the next morning to give her access to the human psychiatric databases. Spent the evening reviewing her research protocol and preparing her analytical frameworks. She felt confident and ready. The next week changed everything she thought she knew. Had given her full access to human medical and psychological records, anonymized for research purposes, dove into the data with the enthusiasm of a scientist encountering something new. At first, she found what she expected. Humans feared heights because falling could kill them. Humans feared large predators because those animals could eat them. Humans feared drowning because they needed air to survive. All of this was logical and consistent with every other species she had studied. Then she found the anomalies. Arachnophobia, the records called it. Fear of spiders. Cross-referenced the data and discovered that the vast majority of spider species on Earth were completely harmless to humans. Only a tiny fraction could deliver venom dangerous enough to cause serious harm, and deaths from spider bites were extremely rare. Yet the database showed that millions of humans experienced severe fear responses when encountering any spider at all, even obviously harmless ones. She assumed this was an error. Perhaps the translation software had made a mistake. She moved on to other entries and found more confusion. Coulrophobia, fear of clowns, had to look up what a clown was. She learned that they were human entertainers who painted their faces and performed for children. They were specifically designed to bring joy, yet many humans reported experiencing genuine terror when seeing them. She checked the statistics again. Clowns had killed essentially 0 humans throughout recorded history. This made no sense. Triskaidekaphobia, fear of the number 13, stared at her screen for a long time. A number. Humans feared a number. Numbers were abstract mathematical concepts. They had no physical form. They could not harm anyone, Yet some humans avoided the 13th floor of buildings, refused to schedule important events on the 13th day of the month, and experienced genuine anxiety when encountering this specific number. She kept reading. Trypophobia, fear of clusters of small holes. The holes did nothing. They were just holes. Nyctophobia, fear of darkness. Darkness was simply the absence of light, not a thing in itself. Claustrophobia, fear of enclosed spaces. The spaces themselves posed no threat if they had adequate air and stable structure. By the end of the week, had compiled a list of over 500 documented human phobias. Many of them seemed completely irrational. Humans feared mirrors, open spaces, long words, the color yellow, buttons, beards, and being forgotten after death. They feared things that had never existed, like ghosts and monsters. They feared things that might never happen, like nuclear war or asteroid impacts. She requested an urgent meeting with. They sat across from each other in a small conference room, projected her data onto the wall, and tried to keep her voice steady. "Doctor, I believe there has been a significant translation error in the databases I've been accessing." Looked at the projections and frowned. "What kind of error?" "The records indicate that humans experience genuine fear responses to things that pose no statistical danger to them. Spiders, clowns, numbers, abstract concepts. Surely this information has been corrupted or mistranslated somehow." Was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled, but it was a sad kind of smile. "No, doctor, the data is accurate. Those are real phobias that real humans experience." Felt something like shock. "But that is not possible. Fear is a survival mechanism. It exists to protect organisms from genuine threats. Why would evolution create fear of things that cannot cause harm?" "That's actually a great question," said. "Psychologists have been studying that for centuries. The short answer is that human fear responses are, well, imprecise. Our ancestors developed strong fear reactions to certain patterns and shapes and situations, and those reactions stuck around even when they weren't really necessary anymore." "But the number 13 pressed. That is not a pattern or shape, it is a mathematical abstraction." "Yes, humans can be afraid of mathematical abstractions. We can also be afraid of ideas, concepts, possibilities, and things that we know don't exist." Four eyes blinked rapidly. This was not computing properly. "You are telling me that humans consciously know something cannot harm them, and they fear it anyway?" "Sometimes, yes. That's actually what makes a phobia different from a rational fear. People with phobias often know their fear is irrational. They know that a spider won't hurt them or that clowns are just performers, but their brains trigger the fear response anyway. They can't control it." Sat back in her chair. In 30 cycles of research across 17 species, she had never encountered anything like this. Every other form of sentient life feared things that could kill it. The fear made sense. It was predictable and logical, but humans feared the impossible, the imaginary, the abstract. She excused herself and returned to her quarters. She spent the next several hours composing a transmission to the Collective Institute. She chose her words carefully, but the core message was clear. Either humans were experiencing some form of species-wide neurological malfunction, or everything the collective understood about the nature of fear was incomplete. 3 days later, she received a response. The Institute was dispatching a full research team. 5 additional scientists would join her within the month. Her request for expanded resources had been approved. The Institute wanted answers. Read the transmission twice. Then she looked out her window at the humans walking through the station corridors below. They laughed and talked and went about their lives, apparently unbothered by their species' strange relationship with fear. She had studied 17 species. She had thought she understood the mind. But humans, it seemed, were something new, something different, something she was not sure she could explain. The research team could not arrive soon enough. 6 months had passed since first arrived at Earth Station Gamma, and she was no closer to understanding human fear than she had been on her first day. If anything, her confusion had grown deeper. The additional researchers from the Institute had helped her gather more data, but more data only revealed more mysteries. The team had set up a proper research facility on the station. They had interviewed hundreds of human volunteers, conducted brain scans during fear responses, and compiled the most extensive database of phobias ever created in galactic history. Senior researcher, a colleague had worked with for 20 cycles, had requested a leave of absence twice. The second time, he had actually left. He told her that thinking about human psychology was giving him something humans called a headache. Understood the feeling. Every answer they found created 10 new questions. Today she was conducting another interview. A young human woman named Sarah had volunteered for the study. She was 23 years old, worked as an engineer on the station, and had reported experiencing a specific phobia that wanted to explore in depth. They sat together in a small, comfortable room designed to put human subjects at ease. Its translation device hummed softly as it processed their words. "Thank you for participating in our research," began. "I understand you experience fear related to deep ocean water. Is this correct?" Sarah nodded. Her body language showed slight tension, but she seemed willing to talk. "Yes, it's called. I've had it since I was a kid." "Can you describe this fear for me?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "It's hard to explain. When I see pictures of the deep ocean or videos of people diving in deep water, I feel this terrible dread. My heart races. My hands get sweaty. Sometimes I feel like I can't breathe." Made a note. "Have you ever been in deep ocean water yourself?" "No, never. I grew up on a space station. I've never even been to Earth. I've only seen the ocean in pictures." "Have you ever been harmed by anything related to the ocean?" "No, nothing like that has ever happened to me." Leaned forward slightly. This was the pattern she had seen again and again. "Then what exactly do you fear? What do you think will happen if you were in deep ocean water?" Sarah's face changed. Her eyes grew distant and her breathing became faster. Even talking about it was triggering a mild fear response. "I imagine being out in the middle of the ocean where the water is thousands of meters deep. I'm floating on the surface and below me is this huge, empty darkness. I can't see the bottom. I don't know what's down there. And then I feel like something is rising up from that darkness. Something big and old and hungry. Something that has been waiting for me. It's coming up through all that black water, and I can't swim fast enough to get away." Stared at her. "Is there such a creature? Does this thing exist?" "No," Sarah said. "Not really. I mean, there are big things in the ocean like whales, but they don't hunt humans, and there's nothing like what I imagine. Nothing that comes up from the deep to get people. It's just in my head." "But you fear it anyway." "Yes, even though I know it's not real. Even though I know the fear is irrational. My brain doesn't care. It feels the fear anyway." Ended the interview and thanked Sarah for her time. Then she sat alone in the room for a long time, thinking. This was the key. She could feel it. Humans didn't just respond to real threats. They created imaginary threats and responded to those as well. Their brains generated monsters that didn't exist and then feared those monsters as if they were real. But why? What possible purpose could this serve? She called a meeting of the research team that evening. "I believe we have been approaching this problem incorrectly," she announced. "We have been treating human phobias as malfunctions, as errors in an otherwise logical system. But what if they are not errors? What if they serve a function we have not yet identified?" Researcher has, a specialist in neurological patterns, looked skeptical. What function could imaginary fears possibly serve? Projected her interview notes onto the wall. Consider what the human Sarah described. She has never been in the ocean. She has never been threatened by anything in the ocean. Yet her brain has created a detailed scenario of danger and responds to that scenario with genuine fear. Her brain is simulating a threat that does not exist. That is a malfunction, has insisted, a waste of cognitive resources. Perhaps, or perhaps it is something else, paced as she spoke. In every other species we have studied, fear is reactive. The fear the cold because the cold has killed them. The fear predators because predators have eaten them. Fear comes from experience and memory, but humans fear things they have never experienced. They fear things that have never happened. They fear things that could not happen. Researcher spoke up. You are describing imagination, the ability to simulate scenarios that are not real. Yes, exactly. Felt excitement building in her chest. Human fear is connected to imagination. They don't just remember threats, they invent them. They create new threats that have never existed, and then they respond to those invented threats with the same intensity as real ones. The room was quiet. The researchers looked at each other. But again, has said slowly, what purpose does this serve? Stop packing. This was the question she had been struggling with for months. The answer came to her suddenly, with a clarity that surprised her. Prediction, she said. Humans don't just react to what is. They prepare for what might be. Their fear response is not calibrated to reality. It is calibrated to possibility. She pulled up historical data from the human databases. Look at their history. Humans built shelters against natural disasters before those disasters struck. They developed medicines for diseases before outbreaks occurred. They created emergency plans for scenarios that had never happened. They constantly ask themselves, what if? And then they prepare for the answer. His eyes widened. They are running simulations, threat models. They imagine dangers and then find ways to survive those dangers. Yes, felt like she was finally seeing the pattern. Other species fear what has hurt them. Humans fear what might hurt them. What could hurt them? What might never hurt them but theoretically could? Their fear is not reactive. It is predictive. Researcher was quiet for a long moment. If this is true, it would explain why they have so many irrational fears. Their simulation engine is constantly generating new threats, even ones that make no logical sense. Correct. The fear of the number 13 is not useful. The fear of clowns provides no survival advantage. These are errors, yes, but they are errors created by a system that is trying to predict every possible danger. Sometimes it predicts dangers that don't exist, but sometimes it predicts dangers that others never saw coming. The meeting continued late into the night. By the end, the research team had formed a new hypothesis. Human fear was not broken. It was simply running a different program than any other species. Humans had evolved the most aggressive threat modeling system ever observed in organic life. They paid a price for this system in the form of irrational phobias and anxiety disorders. But they also gained something, the ability to see dangers before those dangers existed. Began drafting an interim report to the Institute. This was only the beginning of their research, but she felt they had made a breakthrough. Humans were afraid of things that weren't real because their minds were constantly creating things that weren't real. It wasn't a flaw, it was a feature. It was an engine that ran on imagination and fear. She just wasn't sure yet what that engine was capable of producing. The auditorium of the Collective Institute of Sentient Cognition was filled to capacity. Researchers had traveled from 42 different species to attend this presentation. The buzz of conversation filled the air as hundreds of scientists settled into their seats and activated their translation devices. Doctor stood at the podium and waited for silence. She had spent 3 years studying humans. She had interviewed thousands of subjects, collected millions of data points, and consulted with experts across a dozen disciplines. Now she was ready to share her conclusions with the galactic scientific community. The room grew quiet, took a breath and began. Thank you all for attending. I'm here today to present the findings of the Human Psychology Research Initiative. Our mandate was to understand human fear responses, particularly their documented tendency to fear things that pose no genuine threat. After 3 years of study, my team and I believe we have arrived at an explanation that challenges fundamental assumptions about the nature of sentient cognition. She activated the first projection, showing a comparison chart of fear responses across 18 species. Every species represented here fears things that can kill it. The fear extreme cold because cold kills them. The fear the great predators of there because those predators eat them. The fear toxins because toxins poison them. This is logical. Fear evolved to protect us from genuine threats. It is a survival mechanism, elegant in its simplicity. She changed the projection to show the human phobia database. Humans do not follow this pattern. They fear spiders that cannot harm them. They fear numbers and colors and abstract concepts. They fear things that have never existed, like monsters and ghosts. They fear things that might never happen, like meteor strikes and alien invasions. When we first encountered this data, my team believed it indicated some form of neurological dysfunction. We were wrong. A murmur ran through the audience, continued. Human fear is not broken. It is simply running a different program. Where other species fear what is, humans fear what might be. Their fear response is not calibrated to reality. It is calibrated to possibility. Their brains constantly simulate scenarios of danger, generating threats that have never existed, and respond to those simulated threats with genuine fear. She showed brain scan data comparing human and non-human subjects. This is not a malfunction. It is the most aggressive threat modeling system ever observed in organic life. Humans pay a significant price for this system. Their rates of anxiety disorders are higher than any other known species. They experience genuine suffering over imaginary dangers. Many of their fears are completely irrational and provide no survival advantage whatsoever. She paused and let the audience absorb this information. But they also gain something that no other species possesses. They gain the ability to imagine dangers before those dangers exist, and once they imagine a danger, they begin preparing for it. She changed the projection to show human historical data. Consider their history. Humans built flood barriers in areas that had never flooded because they imagined what would happen if a flood came. They developed vaccines for diseases before those diseases became epidemics because they imagined the consequences of an outbreak. They created earthquake-resistant buildings in regions with no recent seismic activity because they imagined the ground shaking beneath their cities. She showed more examples. Humans wrote stories about artificial intelligence turning hostile centuries before they created artificial intelligence. When they finally did create such systems, they had already spent generations thinking about safeguards and limitations. Their fiction had prepared them for a danger that did not yet exist. The audience was completely silent now, could feel the weight of their attention. They wrote stories about asteroid impacts destroying their planet, so they built detection systems and began developing technologies to divert such objects. They wrote stories about viruses spreading across their world, so they created organizations and protocols to respond to pandemics. They wrote stories about nuclear war, about climate change, about technological collapse, and they prepared for all of it. They prepared for dangers that other species would never think to fear until it was too late. She let that sink in before continuing. The fear of things that don't exist is inseparable from the ability to imagine things that don't exist. And imagination, the ability to model what has never been, is the single most powerful cognitive tool this galaxy has ever documented. She showed a final slide. It displayed human achievements over the past several centuries, mapped against the imaginary fears that had preceded each one. Fear of disease led to medicine. Fear of darkness led to artificial lighting. Fear of the unknown led to science. Fear of each other led to diplomacy and law and systems of cooperation. Almost every major advancement in human civilization can be traced back to a fear of something that, at the time, was not yet a real problem. They invented dangers, and then they invented solutions. Stepped back from the podium. My conclusion is simple. Humans are not afraid of nothing. They are afraid of everything they can conceive of. Every monster they can imagine, every disaster they can predict, every threat they can simulate. This constant generation of imaginary fears causes them genuine psychological pain, but it also drives them to prepare, to innovate, to solve problems that other species don't recognize as problems until those problems destroy them. She paused. When a world freezes unexpectedly, the population dies because they never imagined it could happen. When a predator evolves new hunting strategies, the prey population is devastated because they never feared a threat that didn't already exist. These species are reactive. They respond to what happens. Humans are predictive. They respond to what might happen. The auditorium remained silent for a long moment. Then an elderly scholar in the front row raised a tentacle. "Forgive me, doctor. I want to make sure I understand your conclusion." His voice was slow and careful. "You are telling us that humans conquered there, developed, spread across their solar system, and joined the galactic community because they are afraid of monsters under the bed, because they fear imaginary creatures in the dark." Had expected this question. She had thought about how to answer it for months. "I am telling you that humans invented the monsters under the bed," she said. "Their minds created creatures that did not exist and then felt genuine fear of those creatures. This seems like a waste of cognitive resources. It seems like a flaw, but consider what happened next." She leaned forward slightly. "Once humans imagined the monster under the bed, they invented flashlights to see in the dark. They invented weapons to protect themselves. They invented locks for their doors and alarms for their homes. They invented night vision technology and motion sensors and security systems. They created an entire infrastructure of protection against a threat that was never real." She straightened up. "The monster under the bed never existed, but if it had existed, humans would have been ready for it. They would have seen it coming. They would have had tools to detect it and weapons to fight it and strategies to survive it. The monster didn't stand a chance. It never does." The scholar was quiet for a long moment. "You are saying that their irrational fears make them better prepared for rational threats as well?" "Yes, because they are constantly imagining new dangers, they are constantly developing new defenses. They are always preparing for something. Most of those somethings never arrive, but some of them do. And when real threats emerge, humans have usually already imagined them, feared them, and begun preparing for them." Another researcher spoke up, a scientist with expertise in evolutionary biology. "This explanation is elegant, doctor, but it raises a disturbing question. If human psychology is optimized for threat prediction and preparation, what does that mean for the rest of us? What threats are they preparing for that we haven't imagined?" Nodded slowly. She had thought about this too. Humans have been part of the galactic community for less than a generation. Already, their fiction includes stories about wars between species, about plagues that jump from one civilization to another, about rogue artificial intelligences that threaten multiple worlds. They are imagining dangers that could threaten not just their own species, but all of us. She looked out at the audience. "And they are already thinking about how to stop those dangers. They are already discussing protocols and treaties and defense systems. They are preparing for threats that the rest of us have never considered because we only fear what has hurt us before. Humans fear what might hurt any of us, ever, under any circumstances." The scientist leaned back in his seat. "That is either very comforting or very frightening. I am not sure which." Allowed herself a small smile. "I understand the feeling. I have spent 3 years with humans and I am still not sure how to feel about them. They are anxious, fearful, sometimes irrational. They suffer from imaginary threats. They create monsters in their minds and then lie awake at night worrying about them." She paused. "But they also survive. They adapt. They prepare. When something unexpected happens, they have usually imagined something similar and have some idea of what to do. Their fear is not a weakness. It is the engine that drives their survival. It hurts them, yes, but it also saves them. Again and again, it saves them. She gathered her notes and prepared to conclude. My recommendation to the Institute is that we continue studying human psychology with great care. They are not like us. They do not think like us. Their relationship with fear is something we have never encountered before, but I believe we can learn from them. I believe their way of thinking, as painful as it is for them, offers advantages that we have never considered. She looked out at the audience one final time. They fear the dark because they imagine what might be hiding in it, and then they bring lights. They fear the unknown because they imagine what it might contain, and then they explore. They fear death because they imagine what comes after, and then they build legacies and monuments and works of art that will outlast them. She stepped back from the podium. Humans are afraid of everything, and that perhaps is why nothing can stop them. The auditorium was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, the applause began. It grew and swelled until it filled the entire hall. Scientists from 42 species rose to their feet, stood at the podium and accepted their acknowledgement. But her mind was already elsewhere. She was thinking about humans, about their strange and painful minds, about the fears that drove them and the wonders they created. She was thinking about monsters that didn't exist, and the species that had conquered a galaxy because it couldn't stop imagining them. She was thinking about the dark and the lights that humans carried into it.